We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order because we all want to get home tonight before midnight. That would be a great idea. And so we'll start with, first I want to thank State Parks for their terrific job at showing us Bear River State Park. And it was nice to get outside a little bit this morning and wake up. And this is why we're on TRW, because we get to do field trips and we love them. And so we'll go ahead with roll call.
Senator Baldwin. Senator Ellis. Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Jones.
Here.
Representative Angelos.
Here.
Representative Burkhart.
Excused.
Representative Byron.
Here.
Representative Larson. Representative Singh. Representative Storer. Representative Western.
Here.
Representative Winter.
Here.
Co-chairman Schuler. Here. Chairman Newsom.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Great. I said it yesterday, but I wanted to let you know that Representative Burkhart is not here because he's receiving a national award for his work with the mining industry. And we're so excited for him, but it conflicted with this meeting. So we are excited that he is recognized nationally as a great legislator having to do with mining. I guess for those of you that are planning to join on Zoom later today, please raise your virtual hand in order to be recognized. That's really helpful to us. So I guess we'll go ahead and Director Nesbitt, if you want to give your game and fish update.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Brian Nesvik, Director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. I am joined today by our Chief of Fisheries, Alan Osterland. He'll be helping with me with part of this update. I also have the Chief Game Warden, Rick King, with me today, and he will be helping with the update. And I would also note that we have our Commissioner from Kemmer, Ken Roberts, is here today from the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission. I'm going to move through just as a kind of lay out how this is going to go as far as our update. I've got a few things related to legislation that was passed this most recent session that I'll update you on. I'm going to talk about this the harsh winter and the effects it had on wildlife, and then also the potential effects on our department's revenue sources. We're going to have an aquatic invasive species update. We're going to talk about our issues with managing elk that are over the population objectives. And then we'll certainly be ready to answer any questions. I do know that after that last item that we have, Mr. Jim Magagna has a desire to present a potential bill for your consideration. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started, Madam Chair, with just a quick recap of bills that were passed this most recent session and let you know where those are at as far as implementation for those that we had a responsibility to implement over this coming year. First of all, the State Shooting Complex Task Force. I do know that while we're not responsible for overseeing that task force, we are certainly members identified in the statute. I do know there's been work by the governor's office to identify members and solicit those that are interested in being a part of that work. I've had an initial meeting with the governor's office and other members to discuss kind of a timeline. And I believe the work on that, the first meetings will commence here towards the latter part of the summer is my understanding. We had two bills that were passed related to the collection of shed antlers. Both of those bills did not, they were passed during this session. Our antler season, typically in that area of the state where we regulate it, opens on May 1st. And so that legislation was not able to be implemented for this current year. But we are in the process now of drafting and promulgating rules that will implement that legislation for the coming 2024 shed antler collection season. Of note, we did, for the first time since we've had the authority to regulate shed antler hunting, we did extend the opener this year because of the extreme winter that we had and the fact that we still had a lot of big game, especially in this part of the state that were still on their winter ranges when that shed antler season would have opened. And in order to protect those animals and give them an opportunity to move into their transition and summer ranges. We delayed the start to the 15th of May. We did receive authority from the legislature to pursue mountain lion pursuit seasons. The commission will be considering that in September. The mountain lion regulation chapter 42 it's out now for public review and will be considered by our commission in September. There will be a provision in there for the commission to consider a pursuit season. We also are in the process of drafting rules for the implementation of the hunting of predatory animals on public land using artificial light. We're in the process of promulgating those rules as well. And I'm going to ask Chief King to remind me of when that will be before the commission. So at our September meeting, those rules will be considered and by our Wyoming Game and Fish Commission. We did work on implementing the increases in the non-resident special license fees, and those will be in place for this coming application period this coming year. And so we will be able to enjoy those revenue increases over this coming year. And I think those are the highlights. There was certainly a lot of other legislation that the department was involved in, but those are the bills that I specifically wanted to highlight. And I would, before I move on to the next topic, would ask if anybody has any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, after the passing of that bill on the antler collection, I've had some complaints or some concerns expressed from some of my ranching people up there in the Bighorn Basin about maybe we need to make this for the whole state. And so I just wondered what your thoughts were relative to that.
Yeah, Madam Chair,
Director.
Representative Winter. Yeah, I think that because this bill delays the start for non-residents, there's a potential for the distribution of shed antler hunters to move around the state, potentially for those that normally would have gone down in Southwest Wyoming to now come up to like the Bighorn Basin. We have had discussions with the public and landowners in the past about implementing shed antler seasons there, and it's been very controversial. There's not been any kind of alignment, I would say, or any kind of agreement. But our folks have identified the same thing, that we're going to need to re-engage on that conversation in places like the basin. The current statute would not enable us to do it statewide. We're only authorized to do it basically west of I-90 and I-25. So the northeast part of the state is not included in the commission's authority to regulate shed antlers and horns, but certainly your district in the Bighorn Basin is included in that. And we will be having a conversation with the public about whether that's the right way to go.
You have a follow-up, Representative? No. Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Nesvik, I was wondering if maybe just changing track a little bit. I know that there's been some activity at the federal level about listing what qualifies as courier for sage grouse. I think there was a big convention or meeting down in Salt Lake recently, or down in Utah. It has me a little worried about kind of their approach. I was wondering, can you touch on that a little bit?
Director Nesvik.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Western, certainly. So the BLM, as you indicated, decided that they wanted to move forward with what they call a plan amendment. So we're operating now under a plan that was approved 2015. This BLM, this current administration decided they wanted to re-engage based on a recent court decision out of the court in Idaho, Judge Windmill. So the way that process worked before and the way it's working now is that the Western Governors Association and the BLM and the states involved, wildlife management agencies, come together in this task force and really work with them as a cooperator on the specific EIS for this plan amendment. So that process is going through the gyrations right now to come up with a draft EIS and to help inform the BLM and whatever they're going to come up with for a range of alternatives. Separate from that, the state, we are also looking at all the updated science, what the science tells us now about whether the existing core is appropriate or not, where there's places where we should do additions, and also where there's places that we should do removals from core. That right now, that map that outlines those changes to the existing core map in Wyoming is very close to being released to the public. The governor's going to do a news release on Wednesday and ask the public for their input. Essentially, to this point, we've done the science, and now this is the point at which we go out and do the social part of this and consider other things other than just the science. So the map is not a final map. It's open for public comment and discussion about whether there's additional revisions. I'm sure there will be additional revisions that will come to the existing map. The hope from Wyoming is that at the end of the day, the work that we do with our map gets incorporated into the BLM's work. But I will note that the BLM has the ability to not take a carbon copy of our map and use it. They have in the past, but they do have that option not to do that.
Follow up?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Director Nesvik, for that map and for the data that went into that map, we all know in science and biology, rarely do we have concrete black and white answers, but more variation or kind of a gradient of how certain you are in that data. For the science and the data that went into that map, how confident are you in its in just accuracy that really kind of shows what's really going on in some of these populations?
Yeah.
Director Nesbitt.
Madam Chair, Representative Western, I have a great level of confidence in it. We've been collecting data on sage grouse for many, many years. A lot of the data, a lot of the predicate of decisions that are made on that map is based on breeding area, which is, it's a count. It's a going out on a lek and counting how many males are on the lek. And we know from that the science tells us that we can then formulate population estimates, as well as, more importantly, occupancy. That whole map is based, and the core area strategy is based around protecting the most important breeding habitat. The data we have now too, and a lot of the research we've done has also identified other really important habitats, winter concentration areas as an example, connectivity areas, places where grouse need to move. They don't necessarily use the habitat in between, but they need those areas to be able to move back and forth. And so I'm confident in the data, and it continues to always just get better and more refined as we go, the more we collect.
Representative Schuler, or I'm sorry, Senator Schuler.
Thank you. I've been called worse, so
Mhm.
it's all right. No, nothing against representatives. I would love to have joined your team once upon a time when I was younger. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I have two questions, actually. The first one is, when you guys do your public meetings on the two bills, the hunting of the predators and the mountain lion pursuit seasons, and I know you don't meet till September, will we be able to get any kind of input as to how those went? I mean, we didn't get an awful lot of emails about them, but is there any way we can find out what the feedback is from the public?
Director.
Madam Chair, we'll be glad to put this as an update at the next TRW meeting in August. By then, we will have heard public comment, and because we have to gather all the written public comment that we're going to hear beforehand before it ever goes to the commission. We may not have it all wrapped up and complete, but we'll have a general sense of what we've heard to that point, and we'll definitely be able to report on that. And Madam Chair, if I will, I left a question of Representative Western's a little bit incomplete. I wanted to go back there if I could quickly. So the other part of the Representative Western that is part of this process is the opportunity for local sage grouse working groups and all of the stakeholders that are involved to be able to sit down and evaluate the maps and help. To this point, some of that work's already happened. We've had industry, landowners, sportsmen, the wide range of diverse stakeholders involved in helping us get to the point where we're at right now to be able to release a draft map. And this local working group, sage grouse working group model, it's been in place since the executive order was initially developed, and it's been a good way at a local level to get a lot of local input. Thanks.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Director Nesvik. You know, assuming my memory serves me correctly in reading about that 2015 plan that they implemented. From what I recall is that those BLM folks had a very high level of confidence in the data that we had put together then. Obviously, there's turnover at some of these agencies. Do you get a sense of how much how much trust and emphasis they are putting on our maps and our data? I mean, do we have a sense that they're thinking, you know what, that these Wyoming maps, really good data, we're pretty confident in them, or what's your sense there?
Director.
Madam Chair, Representative Western, I don't know that I have a great, I think in general, very broadly, a large proportion of our maps will align with theirs, but I don't know how strongly they're going to feel about some of those things that are most important to them. I will tell you that because it's so important to Wyoming and because we have so many birds, we have 4 members on that task force to try to make sure that we get this right. So we have a member of the governor's office, we have Bob Budd, myself, Angie Bruce participates in that, my deputy director, who's in the middle of this every day. And so we're going to give it our best effort to make sure that's the way it comes out.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I had one more.
Co-Chairman Schuler.
Thank you. But the second question, and you may be going to talk a little bit more about this later on in your presentation, but the special license fees for the out-of-staters. We have some out-of-staters that come every year to hunt in some of my friends and family's areas.
Mhm.
I've not heard one peep from any of them. And I know we had a few emails during the session. I'm just wondering if you're hearing much, or do you think it's because maybe we brought our fees up to what some of the other states around us have? Just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Director.
Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair, we've certainly heard from folks that were concerned with that. I think that a lot of the early concern was based on trying to understand what the legislation did. And a lot of folks presumed that the legislation made it apply to all non-resident licenses, which, as you know, was not the case. A lot of folks, when they learned that they still, if they wanted to go into the standard draw, it wasn't going to cost them any more. I think that helped a lot. I do think that we had a 17% reduction in non-resident elk applications this year. I suspect some of that has to do with the economy. Some of that may have to do with what they saw about our winter conditions, and some of it may have to do with those with the increase in fees, but it's pretty hard to quantify.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, we'll carry on.
All right, Madam Chair, I will talk about winter here quickly. And so essentially, we started off, and a lot of our a lot of the winter ranges in the western part of the state. So I'm going to talk about primarily Pinedale, Kemmerer, and south, and then east over to Green Mountain, Sweetwater country, south down to Baggs, that piece of the state. We had high snow amounts, which had not been in the past anything uncharacteristic. But the one thing that became evident towards the end of February is that it was all staying, and there was a lot more cold nights. In Pinedale, they recorded, I believe it was 62 nights below zero, and a normal year is 38 during the whole winter. That was as of the end of March. And so that was an early indication that the cold, it was definitely colder, and the snow was staying longer. It wasn't blowing away. It wasn't melting off. And we started to see some mortality in the Pinedale area around the end of February. Winter continued to be the gift that kept on giving. Obviously, a lot of great benefits came from it, but it kept up and persisted at a level in that large geographic area of the state that is probably unprecedented for most of our lifetimes. Most of us probably haven't seen that severe of a winter in that large of a portion of the state. Since maybe 49. I've heard folks talk about that winter. We don't have data, but it certainly sounds like it was very close to that kind of a severe winter. We had, thanks to the foresight of Chief King and his team, they had actually right before this implemented a new monitoring protocol to try to better monitor real time deer populations. And we had callers live real-time collars on several deer in the Wyoming range. And so we were able to track through the winter the mortality. And by, the late part of March, we were seeing adult mortality for mule deer in the northern Wyoming range at about 50 to 60%, which is very uncharacteristic. Typically, a hard winter is about 80%. That's when we start to call it a hard winter, is when you got 80% of the adults that are dying. And we essentially lost, 95+% of the fawns. We have seen that in severe winters before, but the real indicator is adults. And in pronghorn, it was kind of a double whammy. We had severe winter that was definitely impacting herds in that part of the state that I just described. And then we discovered a strain of pneumonia that we've only seen one other time in the Gillette area, and that was in 2019. And that was definitely killing a lot of pronghorn. And likely that pneumonia was being exacerbated by the extreme weather conditions and then the concentration of pronghorn. They were going anywhere they could to try to find available forage. A lot of times that was along the road. And so pronghorn really were impacted significantly in that Pinedale area, the Baggs area. There were a few little spots that weren't too bad south and east of here. Actually, there was kind of a little island there that wasn't nearly as badly impacted. And then surprisingly, the Sweetwater area, that for those of you that drove through there during the winter, you would have thought nothing could have lived there. It actually, those critters fared comparatively, they fared better than those other parts of the state. At the end of the day, significant winter mortality. We adjusted our hunting season recommendations to the commission in a very significant way. And this is on the backs of 2 other years of reducing hunting license offerings because of drought for the opposite reason. And so, just as an example for pronghorn, we've reduced the number of pronghorn licenses available in the last 3 years by 25,000. That's significant. We've reduced the number of deer licenses at a similar level. Deer licenses, though, are not all limited. We have general areas. And so a lot of general hunting opportunities have been reduced, which doesn't directly result in something you can measure before the season as far as hunting license sales, but you can after the hunting season. We actually have areas I've never seen in my career. We've had pronghorn areas where we closed the season completely. We did that as an emergency rule after we could really evaluate the full effects of the winter in late May. So what does all that mean to Game and Fish revenue? It's definitely, we are going to see a reduction in our revenue. Our folks have done some predictions based on what we've seen for what we offered for licenses, what we've seen for applications. And I feel very fortunate that over this last 4 or 5 years, the commission has done an exceptional job, in my view, of taking the charge that the legislature gave them to go run Game and Fish like a business when we were taken off the general fund. And the commission, we made sure our operating budget was below our revenue, which gave us additional revenue to be able to create what I call the Game and Fish LISR, or the Game and Fish rainy day account. The commission said we want to have 6 months of operating revenue in the bank in case something bad happens, in case we have a rainy day. We did that. And thanks to the legislature, we were able to invest that in Pool A, which gives us a higher rate of return. And so that is a really good backstop to something short-term like this. We hope short-term, where we have a significant decline in revenue. The other thing that we were able to do because of the way that the commission's managed this budget is that we had changed around the way that we budgeted for standard everyday operating type line items. And for those bigger, large projects that are usually one time, don't require recurring expenditure. And we carved that, we used some of that money that we made above and beyond our operating budget, those additional revenues, to be able to pay for those really important one-time projects that our constituents said that they wanted. Some examples are the Mule Deer Initiative and investing millions of dollars into mule deer each year. We needed to build a new office in Cody, and have for actually about 15 years. And that was the first office that we've ever built without any general fund money at all. And that was enabled by the way that the commission has managed their budget. We had the opportunity to invest in some long-term, really needed infrastructure work at some of our fish hatcheries, which is an extremely high priority for our public. So the reason I bring that up is because this decrease in revenue, at least in the short term, is going to impact our ability to do some of those one-time projects. We're not going to be able to do them at the same level. We'll see how things shake out. We may not be able to do any one-time spending this next year to 2 years. The other thing I would mention too, that has been very helpful in that, when the legislature this past session passed that non-resident special license fee increase, it really offset inflation. It was about, when it's enacted, it's going to be about $5 million a year. If we didn't have that $5 million a year additional revenue, we would be way behind now, because that simply compensated for what we've all seen for the increased cost of just doing business, putting fuel in our trucks, paying our people, paying for health insurance, all those standard operating costs. And so my message at the end of the day here is that we, again, because our commission has had some foresight and I think we've managed our funds well, we're going to be fine in the short term. We're going to have to watch this closely. We're going to have to, there always needs to be an eye on what the department is going to do. We don't have anything built in as far as adjusting revenues based on inflation. There's no standard adjustment or anything like that. That's a case-by-case decision by the legislature. We don't control the cost of our fees. We don't set license fees. We have the authority to set some license fees for reduced price female harvest on elk and deer, but other than that, we don't set our license fees. So it's something that we're going to watch closely. And if we see a need, depending on how this next year or two goes, we'll be coming to you and talking to you about what we do for, again, an inflationary adjustment. So I had hoped that at this point in time this year, that we were going to be in a position where inflation had slowed more than it has. So, we're actually a little bit in arrears from the additional revenue that comes from the license fee increase on non-resident special licenses as you compare it to inflation. But it's not significant. We've been able to adjust for it. So with that, I would stand for any questions on any of that stuff that I just talked about.
Any questions, committee? Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director Nesvik, correct me or maybe refresh my memory. Department can use PR funds for operational measures. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Representative Western, the easiest way to answer that is PR funds are just a part of our annual revenue. So we are allocated money from Pittman Robertson, Dingle Johnson, and Wallop Bro. It's based on a federal formula. Those funds are allocated to the department and we don't actually see them until 2 years after they're allocated because we have to match them. So yes, the short answer to the question is we are able to use most of our operating costs and match them against that federal grant, but it doesn't mean we get any more or any less. We just count on that as part of our revenue. We project it and it's standard revenue along with license fee, collections, and other federal grants that we receive. As a quick reminder for this committee, I don't know if I've talked with this committee about our revenue before, but roughly 80% of our revenue comes from hunting and fishing license sales, and then Pittman Robertson, Dingle Johnson, Wallop Bro. About 15% of it comes from other federal grants in various forms, smaller federal grants, and then another 5% in donations and other smaller revenue sources. So 80% of our revenue comes directly from sportsmen and women.
Could you, we have several new committee members. Could you explain the process of the federal grant process and where the federal government gets that money for that Pittman Robertson and those sorts of grants?
Absolutely, Madam Chairman. So So Pittman Robertson was enacted. I'm gonna forget the year, but bottom line is it's an excise tax on, it's a federal excise tax on the sale of firearms, ammunition, sporting goods. And the federal government collects all those revenues. It's all earmarked. And then they have a formula about, to determine how much each state is going to receive in Pittman Robertson dollars. And that formula is based on several things, including population, license sales, geography. And they run it through the formula and they say, okay, for FY 22, Wyoming is going to receive $18 million. And then as we spend and we match and we have to, it's very complicated. We have to code everything we do a certain way. It gets audited by the feds. But as we code those expenditures, they get matched against what our allocation was for that particular year. And then they pay us after we've actually spent it. So Wallop Bro is specific to sport fish, and it's a very similar excise tax, as is Dingle Johnson. So those are much smaller. Pittman Robertson's definitely the biggest federal grant that we receive, and frankly, all states receive.
Any other questions? Did you have a follow-up, Representative?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Brief follow-up. Director, over the last couple of years, have receipts from those sales tax, have they gone up? I know they're applied retroactively based off total revenue, but have they been trending upwards, or what does that trend look like currently?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Western, the trend has been up. And every time, it's definitely, it does change with presidential administrations. And so typically when you have a Democrat elected president, there'll be an increase in Pittman Robertson collections, firearm sales. And then when the administration changes the other way, then it'll decrease. This last time it did not decrease significantly, and the trend right now is up.
Follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think the director's saying we all need to go out and buy more guns and ammo, which shouldn't be a problem.
Co-Chairman Schuler.
Want to go ahead? Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman. Just one question, since we're talking about revenue. I've often wondered about how much we make out of the license plates from the wildlife section. How much of that comes back to you guys?
Director.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair. So all of the license plate revenue goes into a completely separate account that's actually overseen by Wyoming Department of Transportation. Now, they do consult with us before any expenditures come out of that. But none of that goes into the Game and Fishes Fund at all. And it has been applied now to at least one crossing project. Last I knew, the balance was around 1.5 million. So.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a quick question. You may have said it and I missed it, but I'm curious, are the spring counts of the big game herds, antelope, deer, elk, are they complete yet? Or if they're not, when will we have those numbers?
Director Nesbitt.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator Baldwin. So we actually don't do a spring count or classification in every part of the state. We have certain parts of the state like yours where we look at, we do a classification in the spring for the migratory deer, particularly. They're easy to count on the way back. And yes, all that work has been complete. And, I don't have specifically the adult mortality like in your part of the world, but it's in that 70 to 80% range. And the fawn mortality is almost 100%.
Follow-up.
The good news is in the exact area where I live, the antelope seems to have escaped a little bit as opposed to the Pinedale area. Some of the Kimmer area, they seem to have found a pocket or an island where they survived. Great fawn production right now. I've got twins and in some cases triplets on the roads that I drive every day. So that's good.
That's good.
Deer population, not so well. Elk population, not so well. We literally watched elk die on the hill across from my house this winter. Nothing we could do about it. Nothing anybody could have done about it. But obviously there's significant elk mortality. Some of those elk in places where people are not going to see that.
Yeah.
Some of the deer as well. The antelope are quite apparent, and the deer between here and Kimmer on the highway and out in the fields there up toward Pinedale, up to where some of the folks in the room live. Significant mortality on the deer and the antelope that were very visible. I suspect when we get more people out in the field, and I know some of the horn hunters I've talked to are just finding incredible numbers of animals out in the,
Mhm.
open country. But anyway, I was curious about those. And were there any changes after those counts were completed? I know the antelope license has changed. Were there any other changes as elk or anything else?
No, Madam Chair, Senator
Director
Baldwin.
West.
No, there wasn't any significant change in what we believed we had lost. You do bring up a good point that I didn't mention in my update, though, and that is that we did see elk winter mortality, which that's something in my career I've never really seen. Usually elk, they just go somewhere else or they break something. They don't starve to death. And we did lose elk this year, and that's extremely rare.
Any other questions? Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Along the lines of seeing a lot of massive, carcasses of antelope along sides of the road. I have noticed, I feel like more roadkill. And I guess I don't know if that falls under Game and Fish's jurisdiction to clean that up or Department of Transportation. But it seems like there is a lot more kill along the highway, even driving from Cheyenne to Evanston a few days ago. So can you tell me who's in charge of cleaning that up? And along those lines, are we short-staffed in that area to be cleaning those up? Because it just seems like I see more than I have in previous years.
Director.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator Ellis. So that responsibility is with the Wyoming Department of Transportation. Certainly our folks, if they're out there and they come across a roadkill, they'll pick it up, but that responsibility does lie with the Department of Transportation. And they actually have, they go out on a regular basis with their big snowplow trucks and pick them up. And they've got places where they dispose of them.
Representative Singh.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Director. You had mentioned that there's a strain of pneumonia that's striking our pronghorn population. And earlier in the year, I had constituents reaching out to me about the price of eggs. And ultimately, that was a result of an avian flu in our bird population. So what tools do you have to combat those specific sicknesses in our animal populations?
Director.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Singh. So avian influenza, we have in the past relied on Mother Nature in winter because typically that virus has subsided when it got cold. This particular year, we didn't see that, and our veterinarians are trying to evaluate that and figure out, actually not just in Wyoming, this is a nationwide problem. We're trying to figure out exactly how this new strain, if it is a new strain, and how it survived when it got cold and wet, it would die. Concentrations of animals is probably the most effective tool to try to prevent disease transmission amongst animals. I mean, as an example, with with this, they call it Bovie mycoplasma, which is the strain of pneumonia that got into these pronghorn. It's just exacerbated the closer they are together because they transmit it from one animal to another. EHD or blue tongue is another disease that we have in our state that we see when it's droughty because the animals congregate at water holes and there's a mite there that carries the bug, and then it bites more animals because they're congregated. So typically the tool we have, it's not necessarily a tool that we control very well, but the best tool is just to keep to the maximum extent practical animals from congregating. And then usually nature will run its course and you'll get a good wet year again, and a lot of those diseases are very weather dependent.
I just want to take a break here and recognize that we have our Speaker Summers, Speaker of the House, in the room, and we welcome him to our meeting.
Madam Chair, thank you for letting me know that he's right behind me.
Right behind you. He's kind of doing the little devil ear thing. Any other questions from the committee? Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And Director, just forgive me perhaps for just being a little slow in the uptake. So when you say 80% of adults mortality, that means if there's a population of 100 adults, 80 of them are dead. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct.
Director.
Madam Chairwoman,
Representative Western.
thank you. But Director, God, it would seem almost to be smart just to shut a lot of those areas down entirely. I know
Yeah.
we've done that. You said we did that for those antelope areas, but especially for those deer and elk areas. Biologically, is that the right course of action, or what are you thinking?
Director.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Western. So the department considered I mean, they looked at this and evaluated it in a level of detail that, because of the severity of the winter, was exceptional. And the one thing I think that's important for folks to remember, we heard that from a lot of folks, to shut everything down. You know, buck deer don't have babies. And so, you know, you really affect population increase or decreases by female harvest. There's essentially no, with a few rare exceptions, female harvest of mule deer. There's none in the southwest part of the state. And the same with pronghorn. So that was the tool that that we use to address population, you know, to give them a chance to rebound. But, you know, stopping all opportunity to hunt a buck antelope isn't going to, stopping hunting buck antelope isn't going to turn the population around. It's not going to make them rebound quicker. You literally can have, you know, one buck deer for every 20 does, and they're going to all get covered. It doesn't take very many bucks to make the population grow.
Any other questions? Then I think we'll move on to the aquatic invasive species update.
All right, Madam Chair, I'm going to ask Chief Osterlin to come join me up here. And the good chief is going to walk through some changes that we've made here over this past year and just give you a good general update of where we're at with aquatic invasive species in the state, and our continued record of keeping quagga and zebra mussels out of our state, which is one of our absolute highest priorities.
Chief Osterlin, welcome. If you would introduce yourself and give us your report. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Alan Osterlin. I'm Chief of Fisheries for the Game and Fish Department. As Director Nesbitt mentioned, so far we are free of zebra and quagga mussels in the state, which we have identified as probably the biggest threat to the state. They can change ecosystems fairly rapidly. They can cause a lot of infrastructure damage to water delivery systems and impoundments. Primary vector has been watercraft. It's been identified as recently, a couple of years ago, we had some aquarium plants that we're bringing them into, but the department has been in the program since 2010. And since that time, the department or the program has grown in response to more immediate threats. The two primary threats have been from the southwest part of the country and Lake Powell and Lake Mead, where there's quagga mussels moving up the system. One of our busiest ports is here, right here in Evanston for the state. And then the other immediate threat for us was the Missouri main stem, and that's zebra mussels. And since last year, we saw a bump in the jump from the zebra mussels, which were mostly over in the southwest part of South Dakota, or the eastern part of South Dakota and in North Dakota. And in July last year, we got notification that zebra mussels were discovered in Pactola Reservoir, which is about 27 air miles from the state line in the northeast part of the state. That was very concerning to us. That's pretty close. And then also Highline Reservoir down in Colorado, which is over in the western slope of Colorado. Zebra mussels, which was interesting because the closest population of dry-scented mussels is quagga mussels, but these were zebra. And so, you know, it's becoming more and more rapid. The society's more and more mobile, and these things are moving around. So that caused us to jump our game a little bit. When we started out in this program, we had one FTE, and we had some seasonal employees that man the inspection stations. Last year, or beginning this year, and I'll get into why we bumped this up here in a second, but we increased since 2010 we have now 5 FTEs, and we have 66 AWAC or seasonal employees that man our check stations. So the program continues to grow in response to the more immediate threats. With Pactola last year, as I mentioned, then July is when they said they had a positive finding in the reservoir. In September, when they started bringing boats out of the marinas there, they were discovering that it had zebra mussels attached to the boats, which was even more concerning to us. So that caused us to up our game a little bit. In the fall, in Keyhole and Glendale reservoirs, walleye fishing starts to pick up again, and it can be really good. Data from the inspections from that reservoir indicated that Keyhole was a primary destination in Wyoming for those boaters leaving Pactola, and secondarily it was Glendale. So we thought we better protect the state best way we can. And one of the things that we implemented was every boat that comes in from South Dakota into Wyoming has to be decontaminated, no matter where it comes from. And that's an effort to protect the state, which increases the workload of our folks because it takes more time to decontaminate a boat. Another thing we did in conjunction with in coordination with working with the state parks at Keyhole, since that was primary destination, and then in Glendale, because a lot of boaters come from that Black Hills area into Wyoming to fish Glendale. We closed down all the boat ramps in the fall. We had hours of operation so that we kind of could funnel all the watercraft into one inspection location. And we did that all the way through the fall until ice up, which was in about December 1st for Keyhole, and more around Christmas time. I think it was the 19th of December, we closed Glendale. So we identified that risk levels were not only in the summer months, but also in the fall. In response to that, we had the one Beulah location where we did a check station on coming in on 90. And we've since expanded our program, 2 more check stations. One in Newcastle, try to cover the watercraft coming from that direction, and then one at Manville near Lusk to try to cover that entry point. We already have a check station at Torrington to cover those folks coming to Glendale. We expanded our operations from usually we start in April. It's most locations mid-April. We started beginning of March this year in the shoulder seasons, trying to cover all potential watercraft coming in the state, which was pretty boring for a lot of our inspectors this year because it was pretty cool spring. But nonetheless, we had expanded that program by 16 people to try to cover those inspection programs. And we also increased our budget quite a bit last year for more decontamination units. Some of these remote locations like Manville, you have to try to hire people. There might not be enough people in that local community, so we had to get some camp trailers and provide housing in some instances. We do that here in Evanston as well, so that we can be full staffed. And right now we are full staffed, which is pretty amazing considering the workforce nowadays. Want to wrap up too on inspection numbers to date. This year, as of the end of May, from the first of the year to the end of May, we've inspected 9,632 boats. 841 of those are high risk inspections. That means they come from a reservoir that or a state that might be positive. So we do a more thorough inspection, which may include the contamination, and we've done 178 of those, 176, excuse me. And then we've had 5 mussel boats detected coming in the state, 3 here at Evanston and 2 at Beulah at the northeast corner, and which is about representative of what we've seen previous years. I think last year we had an uptick. The most we've seen in that time period is 9. But last year, typically we do about 66,000 boat inspections. And last year, I think we had 56 mussel boats, which was a record. So it keeps on ticking up every year, and hopefully the trend will not follow that this year, but Director, if you have anything to add to that, or if not, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions from the committee or Representative Western?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Director, my question is, I know that you kind of mentioned there's a lot of enforcement emphasis on that northeast part of the state coming in from the Dakotas. In terms of just that overall enforcement component, do you think you have enough manpower out there in the field on the enforcement side to be pretty confident that we are really doing everything we can? Or do you think that additional manpower, whether it be, check stations, et cetera, those kind of mechanisms, to kind of try to keep a lid on this situation?
Yeah,
Director.
one of our biggest concerns is enforcement because we have people run the check station all the time. And we don't have enough game wardens to put a game warden at every single port 24/7 or as long as the station's open. So, a lot of the people that run a check station are not nearly as high risk. They've got a kayak on top of their truck. They're supposed to stop. They don't. We've not ever detected we've never had a muscle boat that was a kayak. So some of it is mitigated by that, but we certainly have boats that blow by the check station. Our attendants do the best they can to gather information, get it passed along to a warden so that we can get to it. But we do have some concerns there. And we don't have enough wardens to be able to do this across the entire state. We have done some innovative things with local county sheriff's offices. Crook County is an example there. We contract with them and we pay them to help us with that enforcement. The highway patrol at times has been helpful when they can, but you guys have, if you haven't heard, they have challenges as well with having enough troopers. So it's a concern.
Representative Byron.
Thank you. Director, can you describe or fill us in on how partnerships work with our federal partners as it relates to the AAS programs? I know we in the northwest part of the state, there's obviously we have the wonderful Game and Fish check stations. We also have National Park Service check stations. And is the sharing of information pretty easy, or do you guys run into any roadblocks there?
Director.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Byron, we work very closely with Grand Teton and also Yellowstone. And all the information is shared readily. And in fact, their level of priority on this issue is extremely high. We have two superintendents at those two parks right now that take this very, very seriously, and they give their level best to make sure that they're doing their part. As far as other information sharing, there is, we're using technology, and there's some pretty cool things that for states that are willing to buy into this program and be a part of it, we can see boats that have been inspected in another state and where they came from when they come through our check station. And there's a real-time database. Now, not everybody's in, but for those that are in, it is very helpful. And I think that's where this needs to go down the road to enable us to be able to protect against what's becoming just a more and more imminent threat every day. Some states, in the Southeast, you'll look at a map and it won't show any of them as even being infected. And the reason is because they don't collect any information because they've had them so long, they don't even care anymore. They don't even pay attention. They just go spend the money to mitigate all the impacts. But we have a real opportunity here. We're a headwater state, and we still have the chance, I believe, to keep them out of our state. We would much rather spend all these millions of dollars doing a lot of other cool fisheries work or other work. But it's so important that for our citizens that we're going to keep up a full court press.
Thank you. I'm just going to take a short break to recognize Representative Ryan Berger from here in Evanston has joined us. Welcome. Representative Storer, you had a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Chief Osterlin, is there anything statutorily we might want to consider to make it easier to address the mussel problem?
Representative Storer, we in 2021, I believe it was 22, it was a TRW topic, and we did some statutory changes to that. And we made it so that, or you all made it So that if a watercraft goes by a check station, does not stop, and is contacted by a warden on the water and doesn't have an inspection, they have 48 hours to get back to an inspection station, get deconned if necessary. And I believe the fine for that is 450. And then if they don't do that, they can be fined up to don't quote me on this, but I believe it's $5,000. So it's a pretty big stick. Did I have that right, Senator Dallas? $5,000. And this will be really the first test season for that statute is effective January 1st of this year. And you know, as with any kind of enforcement action, deterrence is a big part of it. And if we could make some cases that way to show that we're serious about how important it is for folks to get their watercraft inspected, I think that'd be real helpful.
Do you have a follow-up? No. Senator Ellis.
Madam Chair, that was a nice segue into the question I was going to ask. So we did pass something in this 2022 session. It didn't take effect though until January 1st. And I think that allowed you some rulemaking time. So I'm curious, just an update on how that's gone and then what your marketing strategy is to inform voters of these new penalties. The addition to it was if we crafted it in a way that if this person knew they were told they needed to get an inspection and then still failed to do it, another stick that we threw in there was they could lose their access privileges to Wyoming waterways. So if you could just give us an update on implementation of that statute, that'd be great.
Chief Osterland.
Senator Ellis, committee members. So yeah, we're all poised for that. Enforcement personnel have been briefed on the statute multiple times. And as are our inspectors. As to date, Chief King has just checked. We haven't had any enforcement actions yet, but that we know of. Maybe they haven't been entered in the system yet, but like I said, we're getting into the really the peak time of it. Especially with the play type boats that are be hitting waters, water temperatures come up and stuff. So and as answer your question as far as media is concerned, yeah, periodically we put updates out there, and that is one that we're going to be doing throughout the summer as well, making folks know that they have that statute's out there, and not only just in state, but try to reach out to out-of-state media outlets like on the Front Range and Black Hills and such too.
Follow up, Senator Ellis.
Thank you. I know you've got a really nice aquatic invasive species page on your website. Has all that information been updated? I just hadn't had a chance to find it.
Yes, it should be.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. My question, you've answered some of my questions I had today. One of them though, you know, we have a lot of folks from our corner of the state that it's so cold here. We head south, Lake Mead, Lake Powell, a couple of the places that you talked about, and as well as all the Utah Navy, we call them, and they head down there. But then when it gets hot or down there, then they all come back here to go to Bear Lake and to go to Flaming Gorge and that sort of, you know, Fontenelle. I wondered how many you had actually caught out here at the port. 3, that's kind of surprising to me that there weren't more, but I appreciate the fact that you guys have really done a good job of getting out the information because it's up there all summer long. Actually, it starts in the spring, usually on the YDOT about every boat must stop. My one question is if you do find someone that has the mussels or you know, whether the quagga or zebra, and you have to decontaminate them, how does that process work? And how long does it take? And are they have to leave their boats there, or is this something quick they do? I'm kind of interested in that.
Chief Osterland.
Senator Schuler. So yeah, that's a great question. 2 parts to the answer really. So if they're dead mussels on the boat that we discover, whether it's in the sea strainer, which is kind of a filter that catches water coming in, or if they're attached to the boat, we'll decon, and that process can take about 20 minutes. Hot water wash is what it is. It kills, making sure that everything's killed. Now, if it's alive mussels on the boat, we have the authority through statute to quarantine that boat for 30 days, which is identified as kind of the time period maximum or minimum time period, we need to make sure those mussels aren't viable anymore and dead. And we have done that in past. We have quarantined boats for 30 days to make sure, even if they're not destined for Wyoming waters, we've quarantined them in the past to make sure that they're not going somewhere in the Northwest where they don't have them as well. So we do have the enforcement authority to do that. We do it rarely, sometimes we have the destination, we'll notify them. As Director Nesvik said, we have real time where we can just notify people through the database or via phone that this boat's coming your way and intercept it. But those are the tools that we have.
Representative Byron.
Thank you, Chairwoman Newsom. And this can, maybe the director can answer this. This AIS system has been in place for a little over a decade, it seems like now, and obviously a huge increase in watercraft ownership. And hats off, the process works quite smoothly, I would say, on the citizens end. But the fees for these AIS stickers, whether or not it's non-motorized, motorized, depending on the length of time you want to have your sticker valid for. Speaking of those fees, do they cut? You mentioned you're up to almost 70 staff, seasonal staff. Do those fees help cover the costs of what we're looking at? Do you guys have a breakdown of that? Does it even come close, or can you speak to those fees in that breakout?
I guess who wants to take that one? Chief?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Representative Byron, to answer your question, the decal portion of it, which is $5 for a resident for a non-motorized, 10 for a motorized, and then 15 for non-motorized for non-resident, and 30 for motorized. It covers about a third of the program. The other third comes from grants, whether it's Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Reclamation, Forest Service, we get grants from as well. That's a third of the budget. And then the other third of the budget is sportsman's dollars. So comes right out of our funds, and the budget right now is up to about 2.1 million.
Do you have a follow-up? You good? Any other questions from the committee? I have one, my local kayak dealer, and he's a guide and he does all sorts of things. And so he gets stickers for his kayaks, and apparently he is a certified inspector. And he wonders if there is a more streamlined way to get his stickers, and maybe I'll just have him contact you, because he said the problem is that at our local Game and Fish, they oftentimes don't have enough for him. And so he ends up going back a few times, and it's not impossible, but a little bit annoying for him.
Have him call Chief Osterlin directly.
That would be great.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I guess we will move on then to elk population. Talked about underpopulation, now we'll talk about overpopulation.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to ask Chief King to come join me up here, and we're going to cover this quickly, knowing that I know Mr. Magagna wants to make sure there's time before lunch to be able to talk about what he wants to talk about. And just so you know, many of you may have noticed that I've got this thing, and this is as a consequence of having a discussion about over objective elk populations with Mr. Magagna, and he won. He's a lot tougher than he looks. But as some of you on this committee have heard before, certainly our commission's heard, there are parts of our state where we've got some challenges with elk, particularly on private land, and those places where we have challenges managing elk in places where we don't necessarily have the ability to have hunters. And so Chief King's going to walk through what we've done over this past several years, and even more intently this last year, and kind of what some of the background is on this issue, and I'll just turn it over to him.
Chief King.
Morning, Madam Co-Chair, members of the committee. My name is Rick King. I'm Chief Game Warden and Chief of the Wildlife Division. I thought I'd start out just real briefly, give you a 60-second overview of where our elk populations are at in the state and some of the challenges that we're facing. So last year we had about 60,000 active licenses out there pursuing elk, and our Wyoming resident, non-resident hunters harvested about 27,000 elk. That produced about 500,000 hunter days. So in many parts of the state, elk hunting is a strong economic driver. It's a passion for our sports persons and really in a lot of places, something to be very proud of. However, with that, we certainly exhibit or have seen some significant challenges across the state in managing elk. I'll just walk through a few examples and then focus in on the places where I think our challenges are the greatest. First and foremost, in the northwest corner of the state where we have elk on feed grounds, we have a challenge. Having elk on feed grounds is not always a good thing, especially when we're concerned about the encroachment of chronic wasting disease. But feed grounds also serve a purpose because we have an added complexity of a challenge with dealing with brucellosis, which can spread from elk to livestock. So that's a challenge there. Other parts of the state, we have challenges with state line elk herds that move back and forth, and really just about everywhere in the state, maybe with the exception of Nebraska, we have a challenge of managing elk herds that can move between states, and what our management strategy may be slightly different than what our neighboring states may be. Uinta is a pretty good example here where our strategy is to minimize damage and maximize recreational opportunity. Utah would probably like to have a few more elk on our Uinta herd. I think the biggest challenge that we're currently facing is in the eastern side of the state. So the Black Hills, Laramie Peak, and Iron Mountain. The Iron Mountain herd unit in particular is right in between Laramie and Cheyenne. It's Hunt Area 6 for those of you familiar with it. In those places, we have too many elk. They're above our objectives. We have an objective that's set with in coordination with the public and our commission. And in those herds we are well above objective with elk. So we have a tiered or layered approach to try to manage elk towards our objectives. The first approach is just to use our standard hunting seasons. So the commission each year approves our hunting seasons, and we have used multiple license types, long and liberal seasons, and have tried to get creative in terms of using that regular season framework to manage elk towards objectives. Another approach that we've used for quite a while, which is very successful, is using our Access Yes program and using different components of that Access Yes program. It's a really great flexible program where landowners can work with us to help get hunters onto property where we need to harvest more elk. As a component of that program in the past, we've actually hired contract employees to serve as hunt management coordinators, where they work with local landowners and basically hold the hunters' hands and make sure that they harvest elk safely and in a manner that the landowners have signed up for. That's been a great program, and in some places that's really helped us address some localized damage issues. Just in the last year, though, we've stepped up our efforts, and we've added two more tools, or enhanced two tools in the toolbox for us to address elk populations. One, last summer, the Game and Fish Commission revised our Chapter 34 regulation. That's it was known as our depredation regulation. We've changed the name. It's now called the Auxiliary Management Season. And in Chapter 34, those regulations allow the commission and the department a maximum amount of flexibility to create more surgical or strategic seasons outside the regular season setting framework for us to address places like Iron Mountain, where we just have too many elk and we need to harvest more elk. So those Chapter 34 seasons, we implemented a handful of those across the state in this past winter. Probably one good example is in our Laramie region. South of Laramie, they had several landowners get together. We created this auxiliary management season with the participation of 4 different ranches. We authorized licenses, and in the month of February, we had about 32 hunters harvest 39 elk on those 4 ranches. So a lot of flexibility, really good tool. Look forward to implementing that more as we move forward. Then lastly, the other tool that I wanted to mention is that the commission has always had the authority to issue lethal take permits for wildlife. That's something that the legislature saw fit a long time ago to provide the commission the ability to lethally take wildlife. And so based on the chief game warden's recommendation and approval from the commission, we can institute a lethal take permit. And we did that this year in the Iron Mountain country to an extent that we hadn't done before, where we authorized a lethal take permit. We actually hired 2 contract employees. They went out, they were very successful in getting strong participation from several key ranches in that Iron Mountain herd unit. And over the course of 2 months, they harvested 129 elk. We had them collect all those elk. We held them at our Laramie office, and while we conducted CWD testing, once we found out if they were positive or negative for CWD, then we were able to donate those through the First Lady's Hunger Initiative, Food from the Field. So we were able to donate 128 of those 129 elk. We only had 1 CWD positive. I think that program showed a lot of success. It was a major step in the right direction, and it's the kind of action that we know that we need to undertake in order to get these elk herds that are so far above objective back towards our management objectives. I think I'll stop right there and ask the director if he's got anything additional to add, and then stand for questions.
Yeah, I think, the challenge that when we start talking about solving some of these problems and managing elk, that the Wyoming Game and Fish Department has a statutory charge to manage. We don't have, for the most part, over objective elk problems on public land. It's on private land where we have these different demographics of landowners, where you have some landowners that, they're making a living off the land and have to raise cattle in order to make a living and do what they want to do. And their whole goal in life is not to sell grass to elk. It's to raise cattle and take their cattle to market. And then you have, a different demographic that is definitely growing in Wyoming of landowners who don't need to have agriculture. They have an agricultural component, but they don't have to have it to make a living. And a lot of those folks want to harbor large numbers of elk and don't want anybody in there. And it creates a heck of a challenge for the department, because we don't have any authority to go in there in those places where those folks don't want elk harvested and to do anything. And if they're anywhere, elk don't stay on one ranch. They move around a lot, and they learn where those refuges are quickly. And so you can have a landowner that allow all kinds of access, let anybody in who asks. And, first 3 shots are fired and those elk are on the neighbor's place. And that has been this is not new. It's been an ongoing problem in eastern Wyoming for a long time. It peaks and wanes, but it is definitely at a point right now where, I've had many conversations with producers who are changing stocking rates, who this is a financial impact on them because there are so many elk that they're losing their ability to run the same number of cattle that they have in the past. So it's definitely an issue, and we don't have any silver bullets. But we're ready to answer any questions that we can.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chairman. Thank you, Director. I certainly appreciate that. Obviously, I've got my own passionate opinions on this issue. I won't go into my gripes, but I will say this. I do want to acknowledge and appreciate those landowners that have stepped up and allowed those folks on, because I think concern for a long time is, all right, you don't have too many elk, but you don't want to allow hunters on. And I think some of the landowners and ranchers that have participated and really stepping up to the plate, I think that's awesome. And I really appreciate their willingness to do that. My question, Chief Warden King, is this. Could you maybe elaborate on the difference between your Chapter 34 management capabilities, and you said that the lethal taking authorization? Could you describe the difference between those two and what are they?
Chief King.
Yeah, Madam Co-Chair Newsom, Representative Western. So under Chapter 34, we use hunters who actually purchase a license to do the harvest. And then under Chapter 56, the Chief Game Warden authorizes either department employees or others to take wildlife without a license. It's not tied to a license, not tied to a season. It's purely done on a permit basis. So there's an authorized number, authorized personnel, and an authorized time frame. So Chapter 34, think of it more as an extension of our regular season setting process. So done with seasons and licenses, and Chapter 56 is done purely on a permit basis.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So I just want to know how far over objective you are on Iron Mountain.
Chief King.
Madam Co-Chair, Representative Larson. So we just did a flight and produced a population estimate for Iron Mountain. We estimate there's about 4,800 elk there. Our objective is 1,800.
Follow up.
Follow up.
And then can they hunt there? Can you hunt your way out of this problem with this overpopulation?
Chief King.
Madam Co-Chair, Representative Larson, I believe we can. So just doing some quick napkin math, this year we harvested between 400 and 450 cow elk. And again, as Director Nesbitt mentioned, it's that reproductive part of the herd that's so important to focus our harvest efforts on. I think that in order to bring that herd down towards objective within, say, a 5-year time frame, we need to harvest somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 or 900 cow elk. So it's not unreasonable to consider that it can be done with harvest. We can, it's going to take a lot of collaboration among landowners, and it's going to take the full use of the tools that we have between hunting seasons and Chapter 56 permits.
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chief King, did I catch that right on the numbers of 60,000 licenses and a take of 27,000? Was that correct?
That's correct.
Follow up.
Follow up.
Is that, since you have your cowboy math napkin out, is that average? Is that plus minus? I mean, what do you see normally, or is this an abnormal year because of the weather, or just generally?
Chief King.
Yeah, Madam Co-Chair, Senator Grew. That's about average for the last decade. We've been harvesting somewhere around 12,000 spikes and bulls, and between 10 and 14,000 cow elk. So that number is about average. It's been fluctuating across those numbers for about a decade.
Co-Chair Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Just a question I have on visited with a couple of landowners and also a couple of outfitters before the session started this year with this issue. Of course, they talked about, the elk are really impacting the forage for their cattle and that sort of thing. My question is, if they wanted to get involved in one of these other programs like the Access Yes or the auxiliary management season, if the outfitter leases the land, do we have to go through the rancher, the private landowner, or the outfitter? I'm a little confused on who's in charge there. How does that work?
Chief King.
Yeah, Madam Co-Chair. So really it would be a case by case basis. So there are a lot of landowners who obviously lease their property to an outfitter, but that wouldn't necessarily preclude them from participating in one of our programs. But definitely that agreement would have to be between the landowner and his outfitter as to what other options are available to participate with us in a program. But our Access Yes program, I would just add, it has a ton of flexibility, and we're willing to entertain and sit down and discuss with folks any option that might work for them and their outfitter.
Representative Byron.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Chief King, are there any other, similar to Iron Mountain, are there any other areas generally? I mean, we can get really into the weeds here, but are there any other areas that are similarly over objective, or you maybe even do it on a regional basis, or specific herds that you can speak to?
Yeah, Madam Co-Chair, Representative Byron, I think the three right now that are probably causing me the most angst is obviously Iron Mountain, but our Laramie Peak herd. Our Laramie Peak herd is, we're estimating there's about 13,000 elk there, and our objective is 5,000. And then I think in the Black Hills where that is complicated by two parts. One is the fact that we share that border with South Dakota. South Dakota has a very different management approach. They'd like to have more elk. We would like to have less. And then, as Director Nesbitt mentioned, just that interaction between public and private land and elk with the ability to just find those places where they don't get any harvest pressure. So the Black Hills is another place where we're over objective and landowners are extremely frustrated.
Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Director Nesbitt and Chief King, I really appreciate your efforts in this matter, but my concern is it's really a private land issue in many cases. And it's my opinion that we cannot solve this problem just with hunting. And so, man, I have some thoughts and ideas about how we might do this, but I know there's some other things that have to be considered as well. But I've been following this whole issue with the task force that met in Casper this last summer and our last ag meeting over in Torrington. And it is a serious problem. And I'm sure you guys understand that, but I just want to emphasize that we have got to do something to help these ranchers. I mean, they can't stay in business when they're trying to deal with all these elk. So I would encourage you to keep us informed and keep us involved in the whole thing, because if there's something we can do, we need to do it. These guys are hurting over there, and it's an important issue, especially in private land. So thank you.
Chief King, do you have a comment or?
Madam Co-Chair, I just appreciate the support and will commit to keeping you all informed and engaged on our challenge.
You know, the one thing I would say, Madam Chair, if I may, in response to Representative Winter, I mean, his point is extremely valid. What we have here is a conflict in Wyoming's, and I support it 100%, our value for private property rights and not telling people what they're going to do on their private property. So you have what's good for one is bad for another. And, I would never advocate for legislation that would take away anybody's property rights, but I'm not sure. I don't know how you deal with this on those places that become elk refuges. I just don't know how you deal with it. The state certainly doesn't want to be going on to private property and removing elk, even though we have the authority, the responsibility to manage them. You talk about other options as far as large scale removals and those kind of things. I mean, there's not a lot of support for that, even amongst the landowner community, for large scale kind of removal. And so it's a wicked problem.
All right, is that about it for you,
It is,
Director?
unless you've got more questions.
I think we're good. Thank you, Chief King. Thank you, Director. You might want to hang here for a little bit
Yeah.
nearby.
Please go as tough as you'd like on Mr. McGagnon.
Okay.
I'd appreciate it.
All right. So now we'll go to public comment, and I've been told several times that Mr. McGagnon will want to comment. So Mr. McGagnon, and if there's anyone else that would want to public comment, if you would come up, we're right up against noon, and when these guys get hungry, they get mean. And so we're so good. So Mr. McGagnon, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Jim McGagnon with the Wyoming Stockbrokers Association. After having heard my name mentioned several times by Director Nesbitt, I'm not sure if that was an endorsement or a warning to you, but we'll proceed accordingly. And a little bit of background, this was an issue we had requested that the TRW committee take up as an interim topic, and it was on your list of topics. It appeared to have been dropped as a specific topic when Management Council met on this, so we were a little uncertain as to whether you were going to be addressing it or not. Meanwhile, the Ag Committee decided that because of the impact on private landowners and ranchers, that it's an issue they should be looking at as well, and did that just a week ago here. So I was in front of the Ag Committee then and discussed the issue. Just a little bit of setting the stage for where we are in terms of representing the landowner committee here. As was mentioned by the director, our landowners are not wanting to be paid to raise elk. They want to raise livestock, cattle and sheep. And for the most part, they're very happy to have a reasonable elk population that they share their land with, that's on the land. But as these populations have gotten out of hand by significant numbers of several thousand, that was already pointed out to you, there's both the need to bring the populations back under control, and you've heard the tools that the department has. I think that they're viable tools, but they need to be used far more aggressively than they have in the past. I think of elk as the game and fish's wild horse problem, just like we have over here in southwestern Wyoming, that the numbers get so far beyond what they should be that then it's hard to use the tools that we have available to bring them back down. I'm not going to say it can't be done if the game and fish is resolute in doing so. But we're faced with two things. One is long-term getting those populations down within management numbers. But short-term, what we've become aware of is very significant economic impacts on some of these ranchers. And I've visited with ranchers who, especially during recent years when the drought on top of everything else, have had to reduce their herds by 20% or more just to accommodate the excess elk populations that are out there. And that's a clear financial impact. So what we took to the Ag Committee last week was a proposal as sort of an interim step type thing, hopefully, but to provide some direct compensation to landowners or lessees for elk that are above the population objective, not for the number that would normally be there. The Ag Committee agreed to have a bill to that effect drafted, and they encouraged that I would share this with you as well, in the hopes that the two committees could work together on this. So what I provided for you to be handed out is a plan that would say that this deals only with numbers that are above the elk population objectives formed by the department with public input and everything. But for numbers exceeding that there would be a direct payment to the impacted landowners based on an animal unit basis. In other words, how many animal units of forage have they lost due to the excess population only, and then based on market values of animal unit, that there would be a payment made available to them. It would be their discretion whether they wanted to accept it or not, but it would be available on a formula basis. So it wouldn't involve an investigation of how much damage was done. It's just based on AUMs. One of the requirements that we would think should very much be a part of that, if it would go forward, is that those landowners have to agree to negotiate reasonable access for hunters with the department. So those who don't want access in reasonable amounts would not be eligible to receive these payments. We see this as a way to help bridge that short term until we can get the numbers down for landowners, and hopefully, frankly, as a way to encourage the department to move somewhat more aggressively than they have in the past with addressing the problem. And the chief warden talked about the various tools that they have available. You have provided in statute for payment for, quote, extraordinary damage to grass. And the department has defined that, expanded it a little bit in recent rulemaking. One of the fundamental problems that we have is that that implies some permanent damage or some damage. This isn't damage to grass. This is harvesting of grass that would otherwise be available to, say, to cattle. So it wasn't damage to it when the cattle harvested. It's not damage when the elk harvested, but it's taking away forage that's necessary to meet the needs of the ranching operation for their cattle. So we feel that the understanding, because of that unfortunate terminology perhaps, but of what is extraordinary damage to grass, puts a burden on the landowner to show actual damage to the resource, as opposed just being able to demonstrate that their ability to run their normal number of head of livestock was diminished by the presence of the excess numbers of elk. With that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to take any questions from the committee and would ask you to please remain engaged on this issue. If there are opportunities for this committee and the Joint Ag Committee to work collaboratively on helping to provide some answers, we would be pleased to work with both committees.
Any questions? Co-Chair Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Just a couple of questions. Again, just seeing this for the first time. I assume this statute is what they use now with the grizzly population and how that works with our ranchers. But at the very bottom, chapter 28, when you talk about damage claims, I think this is a good, I'm just going to say, I think that having the 3 years of previous 3-year period of big game presence on there, I think makes a lot of sense because, once in a while you get a rancher that, sells his ranch and somebody new comes in and may not know the history of how much forage has been on there and how many elk and so on and so forth. So I just want to say, I think that's a good catch, but I do think that this has some potential. And I think maybe the ag folks are maybe the ones to jump on board with it, but certainly we could tag team it if we can come up with some reasonable ideas on this, but I appreciate you bringing it. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Senator Baldwin.
Just a quick question. I have a couple of questions reading through this. One of my questions was, I wish that we could lump all landowners and all livestock folks in one group, but we knew that everybody was reasonable. But I think everybody in the room would probably agree that we have some out-of-state people that come in and buy large tracts of land, large ranches. And then in the case of one famous one recently was they claimed $70 million worth of damage to their land by hunters. And my question to you is that if we just go and do this for all landowners, for all ranchers, we'll just say it for now. Will the person that does that, that's benefiting from that wildlife on his land, but won't allow public access? And that was one of my questions on this, exactly what is reasonable hunter access. But are we going to compensate that person with X 100,000 acres of land who's not really ranching? They've got enough cattle out there to call it a ranch, but they're really benefiting from the wildlife, from those elk on their land, because they're charging so much for those non-resident or resident hunters to come in and harvest those elk. How do we differentiate between those ranchers and my in-laws who are ranchers who raise cattle who don't want the elk on their land?
Mr. Van Gagnon.
Chairman Newsom and Senator Baldwin, that's one of the challenging issues. I would certainly say that we should not be providing compensation of this type to the landowner who doesn't allow access. I use the term reasonable. That's something perhaps in regulations, if this were to be put in the statute, that the commission would be able to define. It's going to vary from every situation. Just to bring it up, and it's a challenging subject that it's been around for 40 years, but the Joint Ag Committee also agreed, not at our request, but request one of the committee members, to draft a statute that would provide for transferability of landowner licenses. Currently, every landowner, whether they allow access or not, is entitled to 2 licenses if they own, I believe, over 120 or 160 acres. But those can only be used by them or a direct member of their family. I had proposed to the Wildlife Task Force this past year, at least as a little step in the right direction, that they would allow a landowner to donate one of those licenses to a 501c3 nonprofit in the state of Wyoming. The landowner wouldn't get a direct financial compensation, perhaps a tax benefit, but they could help out an entity that they believe in, who in turn could auction those or raffle them and raise revenue with it. That did not come forward from that commission. I would say that, and as I say, I can recall some 35, 40 years ago when the idea of transferable landowner licenses, which in fact exist in Colorado and some other states, was brought before the Wyoming legislature, and they had to bring extra security into the state capitol when that bill was being debated. So that's my word of caution from back then. But having said that, if the ability to even have a landowner license were tied to some reasonable amount of access, or the ability to transfer one, certainly that might be a motivation. Our perspective is, as the director has said, we're in Wyoming, we're not going to force a landowner to grant access to their land. But if we can incentivize them to grant it, or in contrast, de-incentivize them not to grant it, I think granted, those are some ideas that are worthy of being further explored.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. McGagna, in a previous life worked for the Wyoming Attorney General's office and did one of these cases where there was some damage. The deer had ate some alfalfa, and there was, the landowner claimed that the damages were a certain amount, and then the department said, no, we think they're this. And if there's a dispute between the agency and the landowner, then there's an arbitration process. And so that's all laid out in 23-1901 in paragraph C. And they go through that process, and then there's paragraph D, which talks about an arbitration. And the case I worked on went to that final step. And from what my recollection and just kind of the water cooler gossip was, usually the board or the arbitration decision always comes down on the side of the landowners. And it was an interesting process, but so that's where I'm really confused about how you smush this new paragraph D in between those sections, because it doesn't, like, there's some continuity between paragraph C and D as the statute is now. So by inserting this, I don't know what you're getting after. Do you still want it to go through some kind of arbitration where, and I guess that leads me to my question, in this proposed language you have, it says there's an estimate done. Who's doing the estimating? Is it just the landowner, or is it Game and Fish too? And then do you want it to follow that same process if you have two different estimations that don't align?
Mr. McGagna.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Ellis, certainly I recall several scenarios like the one you described that you were involved in. I'm not saying that maybe this needs to be worded differently and how it ties into the rest of this statute. But our intent here was that because this would be on an animal unit basis, that there would not be a dispute over, based on the animal units, you're entitled to so much. The idea was to avoid the very processes you're talking about, that an offer would be made of a payment based on the number of animal units consumed using the formula that's developed of elk versus livestock, and that amount of payment is what you would be entitled to receive if you chose to receive it. It wouldn't come down to proving damages and then having a commission decision as to what I claim versus what the department felt the damage was, and then the process of administrative or an appeal process and all of that. The intent was to avoid that here, where this would be a straightforward and automatic process. Now, there are certainly factors in here about what the formula is, what's the amount paid per AUM, and that would have to be addressed, I would think, preferably in commission regulation, not in the statute itself, but that's the intent.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
I think, as we look at this, and you said that the Ag Committee is having a bill drafted, I'd want to look at that, because I think then we need to say some either ors, like either use this process, improving damages, and there's the arbitration language, or this. And then I think we also need to give some thought, and maybe this is the question for you right now, is can a landowner tap both wells? They can say, well, there's damage to my land caused by wildlife. They ate my alfalfa, and now I've deprived forage because they ate all this grass that was intended for my cattle because of the excess elk herd population. Or can you only make one claim? I'm just wondering how these two work together. So, I don't know if you've got that all sorted out, but can a landowner ask for compensation under both of these new provisions?
Mr. McGagna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator Ellis, I'm afraid I have it sorted out in my mind, but perhaps not clearly expressed in this very initial proposal. The idea would be that as far as damage to non-cultivated crops, which is referenced in statute, this would be the only damage that they could receive compensation for. This would be in lieu of what's currently in statute. Obviously, we would want them to remain eligible for compensation due to damages to fences, haystacks, other property like that, apart from the 4-H compensation.
Senator Ellis? Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Magagna. I think we'll move on to the speaker, Speaker Summers.
Madam Chairman, thank you. And I apologize for not having my tag. That I should have had my name tag, but I forgot it today. So my apologies. So I just wanted to say that this is one of the few issues that I have got a lot of comments and from around the state, from ranchers, particularly in these areas that we're talking about. And I wanted to relay that. And I wanted to relay one instance in up in the Black Hills. You know, I actually sat down with that, on a Zoom with that gentleman and Director Nesvik and had a conversation. And then I called him afterwards and he said, he says, and this is a guy I really respect. I've worked with him on boards before I got in the legislature. He's not out there. He's a solid guy. And he said, he said in the end, he says, they're not killing enough elk with doing what they're doing. He said, I might just shut down hunting and then bring in an outfitter and just try to get as much money as I can out of that. So I think the thing that all of you and all hunters out there in the state need to think is there could be a different direction this goes. It could end up with more land shut down than already exists today. And then people take advantage of outfitters to bring in more money than they can get out of the damage. The statutes on grass damage, and I know Director Nesbitt have been working on them, and I haven't really gone through it, but I know they are convoluted and difficult to manage as a producer, regardless of whether it was on cultivated crops or not. I think compensation in the short term is an answer. I mean, I go back to our grizzly bear problem that we have. That's an endangered species. You're not going to shoot it. It causes damage. Without the compensation, we wouldn't be able to ranch in that landscape. It's getting to the point, I think, in some of these places where these people are wondering, is it time for me to just sell to the next rich guy? And I don't know that we advance. And I know that, that's kind of a, you're just saying that but no, it's true. Some of these guys getting hit really hard. It's like impacting their ability to make a living, and they're just average ranchers. And so I think you all need to address it somehow. I think there's Mr. Magagna brings up one I thought of. If you keep the same extraordinary grass damage, and if you provide access, maybe you get paid for access and the damage to the grass, right? Because you think about it, you're losing the grass, you ought to get compensated for that. Well, you're not getting any money for access then, because so maybe there's two values here. Maybe you can provide a little money for access, some money for extraordinary damage. His is, Mr. Magagna's is by far the simplest. If you just got to get it right. So, and you got to make sure you do it in a manner that the state doesn't get taken, right? That hunters' dollars doesn't get taken unnecessarily, but it is a problem. Will some rancher abuse it? They will. Just like any business with anything, there are people that will abuse the system, and we in ranching are not exempt from that. So I just hope I know John was, I think he was around at that ag meeting. I went back and watched it online, and I appreciate all the good comments there. But just know even though it's not in my area, it's been an issue that a lot of ranchers have contacted me about. Thank you. I would stand for any questions.
Any questions for the speaker? Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Speaker and Mr. Magagna, I appreciate both of you being here. And I appreciate you explaining the situation better than I could have, but this is a big, big problem. And it's not only for the ranchers out there in this particular elk area, but it's the whole state of Wyoming. I mean, and Mr. McGagnon brought up the fact about the wild horses. The bottom line here, the way I see it, is that the range resource is what we have to protect. And these ranchers are probably the best conservationists there are. And they're having difficulties because there's too many elk and there's too many horses. So we have got to do something to remedy this. And I appreciate the Game and Fish using all their efforts to harvest elk and so forth, but I still I cannot imagine this being the final remedy. We've got to figure out a way to handle this, get it taken care of. 5 years can break a guy big time on these ranchers. And if we have to wait 5 years to get numbers down where they should be, I think that's too long. And so I would hope that we can work with everybody and try to get something going where we solve the problem and don't keep pushing it down the road. So thank you.
Madam Chairman.
Mr. Speaker.
Madam Chairman, I know that wasn't a question, but that he proffered, but he's right. You know, the Game and Fish has actively managed Iron Mountain fairly aggressively, and even more aggressively this year, basically hiring hunters to go in and harvest cow elk. And they're at 400, whatever they said, the take, I forget what the take was. And then it sounded like, you know, he needed to get up towards 900. It sounded like that was half of what he needed to get to on Iron Mountain. Maybe I misunderstood that. But do you know how hard it is to get another 400 cow elk killed by hunters? Representative Western knows how hard that is. That's difficult, right? And I think, you know, once you get good hired hunters in there that maybe can shoot 5 or 6, elk are darn smart. And so it's going to be a challenge to get the numbers down, I think. And I think Game and Fish will continue to refine that program. What's also concerning, and I think you need to ask, eventually we need to ask the Game and Fish about, and what was apparent in that when I went back and listened to that ag meeting, and I know you guys are about to go to lunch, but the expansion of elk eastward in eastern Wyoming, you know, into Goshen County, into areas that elk have never been in before. And so you're going to continue to get these pockets, and then they're likely to blow up too. And so I think it's something we need to get a handle on, because elk are expanding and expanding pretty rapidly in Wyoming. And I don't think they want our grizzly bears and wolves to help cut down that population.
Any question for either the speaker or Mr. McGagnon? Thank you both. Any other public comment? Anyone online?
Madam Chairman, we have Patrick Sweeney that would like to testify.
Okay. So if we can bring him in.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So just.
Hey, Pat, Mr. Sweeney, we are just headed to lunch.
Yep,
So if you can keep it brief, that'd be great. Thank you.
I thank you very much. Pat Sweeney from Casper. Just Director Nesvik believes, and I think he's probably, well, I know he's accurate, but on the budget, what I would ask for is the committee's consideration of continuing to work with the department. I believe they will have a need out of the general fund because of the deficiency in license sales. I agree with them that the additional monies from the non-resident licenses sales that the legislature approved will help. But as he pointed out, that basically will keep them fairly steady just with inflation. But I do believe, and perhaps the committee could discuss at some point a letter to the Appropriations Committee to be aware during the budgeting process is my only comment. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Any questions for Mr. Sweeney? Okay, thank you so much. All right, committee, we are right at the half an hour past lunchtime. I think that we can probably do lunch in an hour 15. And that'll just put us, I was gonna pat myself on the back for getting us to lunch on time, like my co-chairman did not yesterday, but I guess I failed that too. So if we could be back at 1:45, that would be great.